Where Freedom of Speech Begins. October 22, 2020 by Anna von Reitz. First, in order to have a natural and unalienable right to free speech, you must be able to speak. That is, you must have a voice. That pretty much cuts out inanimate things like corporations and rocks and offices of personhood. The Queen never speaks. A living woman enters the office and speaks, for it, like a ventriloquist operating a dummy. Same thing for the mayor of New York or the president of the United States and all other offices of personhood. The offices remain whether or not they are vacant or occupied. What this means is that persons, which includes corporations of all kinds as persons and those operating as personnel within corporations, have no natural or unalienable right to free speech, but people do. Thus, when a corporation like Facebook, or Google or Twitter or Microsoft offer to abrogate the free speech of the people using communications platforms that depend upon charters issued under our delegated authority and which further depend upon the use of our airwaves and utilities to exist, something distinctly unlawful, unpleasant, and unnatural is going on. How is it that something dead, something that is only allowed to exist by our forbearance, and which can only be organized for lawful purposes, is allowed to censor us and violate our right to free speech? No such thing has ever been heard of in the history of the world. Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Microsoft are all traded as public corporations and have no prerogative to engage in any private selective service demands. Remember the famous bakery that refused to take an order for a wedding cake from a gay couple? That was a private unincorporated business and their right to selectively serve the public was upheld. But no incorporated entity traded as a public corporation has any such prerogative. Read that, the moment Facebook, Inc., decided to incorporate itself and offered to sell shares on the stock exchange, its claim to have and exercise any private, community standards, as a means to censor public discourse flew right out the window. It's time for the attorney generals to get off their flat little rumps and bring this point home to their erring franchisees. Our ability to speak and to speak freely was not created by corporations, and they must not be allowed to interfere with our self-expression or any other attribute we have as living beings. Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, and other tech giants, especially in the pharmaceutical and space and defense industries, have gone too far. They have engaged in unlawful suppression of our guaranteed rights and offered to enslave us by secretively introducing patented RNA into our natural genome, thereby unlawfully converting divine creations into patented GMO products. This is unlawful activity in contravention of universal law and a perversion of all that is sacred. And still the Roman Curia, which is responsible for its creations, sits mum as a stump, and Francis does nothing to exercise the right, and responsibility, to liquidate any corporation engaged in unlawful activity. This includes Bayer and Monsanto, NIH, CDC, WHO, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the Pirbright Institute, the World Bank, and all the other party-hardies responsible for these current criminal commercial activities. The guilty and complicit governmental services corporations do nothing to rein in and circumvent these gross abuses, so it is clear that we must act in our own self-interest as state assemblies to outlaw human GMO tinkering and prevent patent claims against the interests of living people so as to obligate or enslave them based on modification of their natural genome using patented RNA or DNA products. Any law of any foreign state legislature or act of any foreign Congress seeming to allow such practices is abhorrent, null and void by its very nature, but it remains for us, the living, to deal with these corporations, and to bring a sure and certain end to these perverse attempts to enslave the living to the dead.